And we are live. Yeah, who remembers their passwords these days? And then various apps will prompt you to create a new one. It's time to create a new password.
Right.
I was happy with the old one.
I
All
know.
my friends know it.
Well, I've got this password keeper thing that just generates a new 16-digit
Random, yeah.
word, but, like, I'll never remember it, so I'm just constantly
Oh, and the passwords that get suggested, are so random. And I get that's security,
Right.
but really? We can't think this up in letters and numbers? Good afternoon, Janet. We got a couple people on. Hi, Lisa. Welcome. Welcome. You're in Florida. I kind of wish I was in Florida right now.
Well, if you're on the West Coast, you're celebrating 420 today. It's a big day for us here in California.
It's a big day in California. Well, it's a big day in New York too, I guess. I have to ask, is recreational cannabis legal in California?
It is.
It is. Okay. I wasn't sure. I know medically you guys were leaders.
Mm-hmm. I think Colorado was first recreationally, and then California was shortly after, or maybe Washington. I mean, the West Coast, all of it. Yeah. We're dropping these new shirts for 420 today. Can you read that?
Attracted by dogs and weed. Oh, that's funny. That's funny. Well, and of course, let me back up. Welcome everybody to another Facebook Live in support of the Healthy Dog Expo. My guest today is Ruby from Real Dog Box and the Feed Real movement. And we always discuss, what's going on in our world while everybody jumps on. So we know what's going on in your world, 420. But, it's like cannabis and CBD and THC and all the array of components of the plant all have a role.
Right.
And, it turns out dogs have just this huge endocannabinoid receptor system. And it's like they're almost designed for this to be used as medicine, as are we.
Yep.
The plant gets a stigma, but it really has its purpose. And Angela, hi, Angela. Yes, one of our CBD experts. We've got a lot of them at the expo. So you're going to learn a lot about the various uses of the plant. And I imagine both hemp and the marijuana plant. So we got you covered.
I'm excited. I've learned a lot of what I know from Angie. She's amazing. She's just like this wealth of knowledge. And not only with CBD, but like helping push females in this space forward.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Hi, Diane. So it was really ironic that we're talking today because I found a box on my doorstep, and inside of it were some gifts. This happens to be bison spleen, something we might be talking about today as we talk about ancestral diet ingredients, and some wild caught salmon. And I didn't dig through too much because imagine this, I was running late. This is a bison scapula. Sorry about the reverse camera. These will be in the raffle gift baskets, along with there's some other bigger chews. I think there was a cow ear there. And like I said, I didn't dig to the bottom of the box. But thank you so much for this generous donation. I know my guests are going to love it.
Oh, our pleasure. I cannot wait. We are so excited. We've been talking about the trip for the last 3 weeks, at least.
Yeah. Well, for you, it's a big trip. You're coming across from the other side of the country.
Yeah. And for us, we do host a lot of events in California, but we have so many customers on the East Coast that we don't get to connect with face to face. So once we shared that we were going to be there, a lot of our existing customers were like, oh my gosh, we get to meet you in person. So
yeah. And you're going to bring product to sell for people?
We are.
Excellent. And, if people have requests, is there anything special? Like, I must have bison spleen. Will you have it?
Yeah. Shoot us a message. You can reach us on our customer service text line or any of our social media. If you got special requests, we're going to bring the whole kit and caboodle. Everything's coming with us. But if there's something like right now, we've got our food toppers that has been just a lifesaver for raw feeders, which we'll probably talk about in a little bit today. But that is just flying off the shelves.
Yeah. So if there's anything specific you want, put your request in. And hi, Amy from Massachusetts, Amy from Goodness Gracious, another one of our awesome sponsors. So let's dive into it. You wanted to talk about the ancestral diet and ancestral diet ingredients and how people can incorporate this aspect into their feeding plan.
Yeah, I did. And I know you have a pretty educated audience. Something that I've been seeing so much recently, like I love that people are wanting to make their dog's food at home,
Mhm.
switch to a fresher food diet, but so much more. I'm seeing bowls that are filled with chicken and rice,
Okay.
hamburger and potatoes, peas, and all of these things, which it's a great way to start, but we're
Mhm.
missing so many important components of
Yeah.
food diet.
I have people tell me, I got some boneless chicken breast and I took the frozen peas and carrots and whatever else comes with them. And I
Right.
dumped it in and it was great. The dog loved it.
Yeah, exactly. Which it's a great start, and I don't wanna
Yeah.
discourage anyone
Yeah, I
from
don't want to take the wind out of their sails for sure.
yes, yes, but there are some components that are really important to have in there every day if you can, but if not, at least topping meals with these.
Mhm.
So we came up with the ancestral diet a few years ago, and it was inspired by the existing raw feeding models out there, the PMR, BARF, or PMR plus. A lot of people refer to it.
Mhm.
But the components have are 6 different ones for ancestral that we think should be in the diet every day if you can. Raw meaty bones for your protein and your calcium source. Organ meat, especially, so your liver and another secreting organ. We like to include seafood for omega 3s
Mhm.
and overall lean protein, and as well as fiber. And the source we like to use is fur. I absolutely love feeding fur. And I think you probably have some fur on items in that gift basket
I
too.
think I do. I know I have a cow's ear. It's this big.
Yeah, and there are other sources of fiber. Fur is what we like. There's sources for all of these things that I mentioned, but if you can include those 6 components, that will be a great baseline for making food at home.
Yeah. And I mean, I will use fiber from vegetables. Vegetables are not evil. And you have to remember, we're feeding the microbiome as well as we're feeding the dog.
Mhm.
And I love having some variety in, all of these things, but in the fiber source.
Oh,
Uh,
yeah.
and Karen Becker is always talking about the great mineral components that you can get from fur. So you can meet some of your mineral needs from that rather than doing synthetics or fighting to find a food.
Years ago, when I first started feeding raw, I read one of her articles about manganese
Yeah.
deficiencies in dogs that suffer from CCL tears tend to have
Mhm.
this deficiency. And where is manganese most found? Fur, feet, and feathers. And I never forgot it.
Yeah, yeah. And, you can also find good amounts in seafood, but let's say you have a dog that or you can't source that seafood.
Yep.
Um, so it's a great alternative. So where can someone source hair on ingredients?
Oh, that's a
Obviously
good
from
question.
you, because
Yeah.
it's not, it's not something you're gonna find at your local store of any type.
Well, here's the thing. A lot of these parts that are harder for us to source in whole foods, they're going to be in dog food, processed dog food anyway. So we know they're out there.
Mhm.
We just added a raw feeding dog food directory to Feed Real's website, and people are actively adding suggestions. But ethnic stores, butchers, if you can, or other raw feeding supply
Oh,
stores.
yeah, the people who like processed deer during hunting season and such. I
Exactly.
don't know that I'd want deer if depending on the number of ticks that are attached to it, but,
Sure.
you might find something else. That's a great suggestion.
Yeah, we had a workshop the other day, and this young woman went to her local butcher and she was asking for organ meats. And he was like, come back tomorrow. And he gave her the entire innards of a
Oh,
cow,
yeah.
which is
Yeah,
amazing. Yeah, so the lungs, the trachea, everything was all attached. And so there are people out there that are butchering these animals and they just don't know what to do with these extra
yeah,
parts.
most humans, unless it's part of your culture to eat beef kidney, are gonna do anything with a beef kidney.
Yeah, Yeah. Well,
Um,
and something interesting about that, I grew up with my mom eating a lot of organ meats, like
mhm,
liver and onions was a staple in our household. She used to make pig brains, like she would kick
mhm.
all these different ethnic specialties.
Nothing went to waste, which is admirable.
Yeah, exactly. And what we're finding now, like ancestral supplements are making a comeback. Like I've seen these little beef liver capsules and all of these things because a lot of people don't particularly like the taste or the texture. It is an
Mhm,
acquired taste, if you ask
mhm.
me. But they are understanding that there are so many nutritional benefits to eating the organ meats that
Yeah,
they're we got to get it in somehow.
yeah, definitely. And, right now, obviously, you've gotta be careful with nervous system tissue from land mammals. Uh,
Yes.
but, the other organs, yeah, they all have things to bring to the table, pun intended. And, yeah, give them away. Um, there's a raw feeding company that uses basically wild shot deer and elk, and they throw the organ meat away in the field. The hunters dress them out there. And it's like,
Mm,
"Oh my god, you're missing such a huge opportunity." And, obviously, these are totally grass-fed, free-range animals. The quality of the meat is probably high, but imagine the quality of the organs.
yeah, yeah. When we visited Hawaii a few years back, right before the pandemic,
Mhm.
and the island we were on, Molokai, the deer there is an invasive species. So
Yes, I've heard
local
that.
people, yeah, they're basically out hunting. And we went with this one local gentleman. He took us out. We shot a deer and basically had to bring it back. And he showed us how to dress it right there in the field. And we're looking and we're like, what are you doing with that liver and that heart?
Yeah,
And
bring it.
it's so plentiful that even though they know the benefits, they're like, we just have so much already. So, of course, Turk and I were like, can we just put it in this plastic bag and bring it back to our hotel? And we fried it up that night with the fresh herbs like ginger and stuff that we found on
Oh,
the
yeah,
ground. And it
yeah,
was delicious.
yeah,
I
yeah.
felt like I never ate something so clean.
So clean and close to nature.
Yes, exactly.
And, that's I'm people have different feelings about hunting and, that's understandable. But if an animal can live a great life and have I guess you would say, as clean a death as possible, a la if you're gonna hunt, be sure you have skills, and
Sure.
then be used and serve nature, I'm okay with it.
Me too. And I mean, I think
It's better
about,
than the feedlot cattle that
yeah,
suffer through all that.
exactly. So, two things on that. In those on those islands where deer are invasive species, that's because somebody decided long ago that it would be cool to bring these animals to the island. It
Yeah,
wasn't by choice, but they're there, and there's no predator, right, to take care of
right.
it naturally.
And there's finite space, it's not like they can pop over to the next state.
Right, exactly. And then when it comes to factory raised animals, I mean, the reality is those animals are raised for human consumption. And I think the respectful thing to do is to use the entire animal. When we found our cow ear supplier, I mean,
Mhm,
we had been going through the same distributor for years. And
mhm.
it just dawned on me that I was like, what are you doing with the ears? And he said, we're just tossing them. And I'm like, are you kidding me? He said,
They're
well,
probably tossing most of the head, right?
they are. And there are some sensitivities and regulations about feeding cow head meat
Yeah,
because of mad cow
but
disease.
what about, like, beef cheeks? Because
Right.
that's a muscle meat.
Yeah. No. And they're just tossing the rest of the
Yeah,
brain.
yeah, yeah,
Uh,
I mean, you can't do the brain, and as Diane brought up, depending on even like here in New York, we have loads of whitetails, but they're out there, being contaminated, even though they are free ranging and grass fed. We can't
yeah.
stop this.
Yeah.
It's
No. And it's unfortunate. And that's, we're in the pet space and there's
yeah,
a bigger problem to be solved agriculturally
yeah. I mean,
globally.
those deer are probably still better than farm raised animals, but it's a concern.
Yeah, For sure. But yeah, when we found out that they were just tossing the ears, I mean, we had to go through this long drawn out process to make sure that, they upped their inspection guidelines because they're going to now be sending us what's called inedible product or non-human grade.
Right.
But once we were like, well, don't throw it in the trash, we'll pay you for it. They were like, okay. And I'm
I
like, it's
found a
also,
way.
yeah,
There's always a way.
yep, yep.
Um, yeah. So the sourcing of hair, can be a challenge, but it's doable. It's
It
doable.
is. It is. And I think another thing to think about is there are local rabbitries, people
Oh,
that raise rabbits for human
yeah.
consumption. The woman that I partnered with during the pandemic, so she raised rabbits for restaurants. And then all of those restaurants closed during the pandemic, and she was looking for a new buyer. And I took her entire supply. I was like, well, what are do you need, she's like, should I butcher them or like what? And I was like, no, I'll take them whole. And we did that in house for a while. Um,
Mhm.
the rabbit meat is great and you'll find it on a lot of farm to table menus.
Yeah.
And we just give their other body parts a home.
Yeah. So again, sticking to the philosophy of honoring the whole animal.
Hmm.
I really like that. So what organs, your favorite organs? That's
My favorite organs. Well, I'm a huge fan of grass-fed beef liver. And
Mhm.
years ago, when I was first starting to feed raw and helping others, the question I would get all the time is, does it have to be grass-fed, pasture-raised, organic, all of that? And for years, I said, feed what you would feed the quality of meat to your dog that you would feed yourself if you eat meat, of course. Because I really thought that it would be outside of somebody's budget and cost prohibitive, and that would discourage people from wanting to feed a fresh food diet. Now that I understand that the nutrient profile of grass fed beef liver is superior, so much superior to that of the grain fed counterpart, I
Yeah.
no longer, in good conscience, can tell somebody just feed regular beef liver.
Yeah.
If you can, if there's anything to splurge on, it would be the beef liver for me, for the liver component, to make sure
Yeah.
that that's grass fed and organic.
Yeah. Without a doubt. Without a doubt.
Yeah, and it just has so many nutritional benefits. I mean, we feed organ meats we call it the multivitamin, right? Your vitamin A, your vitamin D, all of the really good minerals, the iron, copper, magnesium. That's why it's such a nutrient dense part of the animal. So we love beef liver. We recently, about 2 years ago, switched to only grass fed beef liver for all of our products because of that finding on my part. Um, and and then the other ones that I like are spleen and kidney.
And what do you like about the spleen?
I think the spleen is one of the most underrated organs. It's a little bit harder to source, but I have recently found it at my Italian butcher, what we have out here.
Yeah. What do the Italians do with spleen, I wonder?
Well, in Sicily, they have these like food carts. It's a street food, and they make a
Oh.
spleen sandwich. So it's often referred to as melts. If you're in a grocery store, you might not see it called spleen. They call it melts because it literally, once you cut it, it's like,
Oh, the spleen is the most fragile organ. In teaching veterinary students to do surgery, you're forbidden to handle the spleen.
is that right?
Yeah, because literally just in moving it aside, you can brush abrade it, and then it starts to bleed. And God forbid, I've only done it once on a dog spay. You nick the spleen because sometimes it's right against the abdomen when you make your incision for a dog spay. If you nick it, all of a sudden your field is just blood. It is the scariest damn thing.
Yeah,
Um, and you have to place sutures in it. Like, yeah, I had just nicked a corner, so I had like a little triangle defect, smaller than the size of your nail, your pinky nail, and it's gushing blood. And you have to put a certain type of suture in there, and squeeze it so it stops bleeding, amid your field being obscured
sure.
with blood. It'll raise your heart rate, let me tell you.
I bet, because it's like you can't stop it.
Yeah. Well, and, first you have to find it, needle in a haystack. And, you can get finger pressure on it with a gauze, and then you get to see what you do. But you then have to make another hole in it in order to fix the hole in it. It's crazy.
Mm.
It is crazy. And fortunately, they've created a lot of things called, generally lumped under the idea of gel foam, but it's actually something that looks like a foam that melts when it hits blood, and it provides a clotting framework. So we essentially give the red cells a network to put the clot in, and it absorbs, and you're fine. And you move on with your procedure.
Wow.
So more than you wanted to know about the other side of the spleen.
Yeah, yeah. Have you done a lot of ER procedures like that, or just that one?
Well, that was in a routine dog spay.
Oh, wow.
Not even, not, no, I thought at one point I wanted to go into emergency medicine, but no. They work at 3 in the morning. I'm a definite night sleeper. The hours stink. But if you're an adrenaline junkie, it's the place you need to be.
Yeah, for sure.
But certainly taking a fair number of splenic tumors, sadly, out of dogs.
Hmm.
And then you're trying to get something out of them without breaking it open because the tissue is so fragile.
Scary.
Scary.
Yeah.
But it's an amazing organ, and it, takes care of your red blood cells and has some great nutrient qualities.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So in Italy, and I think when I was in New York the last time, I went to a little corner deli and they had
Mhm.
a spleen sandwich there.
Oh,
Very
wow.
popular. Yeah.
Yeah. That's mind-boggling.
Yeah. So another place, if you're looking for spleen, go to an
Go to
Italian.
an Italian butcher.
But the other reason I like spleen is also because it's super high in iron, and everyone thinks that you have to get your iron from liver, and that is not always
No.
the case.
Right.
You mentioned variety, which for me is super important to mention. Even though we're getting certain nutrients from grass-fed beef liver, for example, that's going to be probably higher in copper, right? That's a huge
Mhm.
argument
That's
for
a
why.
huge concern right now.
Yes, yes. And that said, grass-fed beef liver is higher in copper in a healthy amount than pork liver, for example. But pork liver is higher, I think, in iron than beef
I
liver.
think you're right.
Yeah. So whatever the organs are that you're able to source,
Yeah.
switch it up if you can. If you see
Yeah.
something on sale, get that for the next month before
No,
you.
and it's easy enough to look up the amounts of different nutrients in these various organs for various species. And, it's all in how you assemble your plan for the week. Okay, I can use some pork liver to get this. I can use a smidge of beef liver to get the iron up, and still be within the safe zone of all these minerals.
Yep, exactly. Yeah, so spleen is another fun one. And then kidney. We
Mhm.
like to use the insides of kidneys for making lard. Some
Okay.
soaps are made from beef lard that is directly from that because the kidney's kind of like dual textured. If you've
Mhm.
ever opened it up, you've got that fatty piece in the middle and then a very lean organ texture on the outside.
Called the cortex.
Yeah. So those are fun to feed. I mean, besides the nutritional benefits, switching it up for your dog is exciting. They like
Yeah.
to have different stuff.
It keeps the dogs engaged.
Hmm.
Although, most raw-fed dogs are pretty eager eaters, but still, why not let them enjoy it? Um, I think we've kind of addressed Courtney's oh no, we didn't. So sourcing organs, how can you make sure it's safe to feed, not infested with parasites or diseases? Are there physical things you can look for? Obviously, you can see like liver flukes in some species, but when you're in the human quality range, that's much less common. Have you found anything in the organs you
Uh,
or the rabbits?
Very rarely, I have found liver flukes from grocery store bought meat, but
Mhm.
I'm fairly confident that anything that you're getting from your human grade grocery store is going to be safe.
Yeah.
I think where you run into some concerns is if, as you mentioned, that deer that's wild,
Mhm.
feeding grass fed, free range. You just don't know what other sort of parasites they've come in contact with. I've always followed the guideline if it is if it's game meat, right, that is from the wild, to freeze any of the body parts for at least 3 weeks to
Yeah.
kill those parasites.
Yeah, and most of those parasites are not going to cross species.
Right.
So, it's just kind of gross. And if you're on the human side, in the ingredient sourcing and those meats are being inspected by a meat inspector, they're certainly going to cut down and check. So if you find one, it was probably the only one that was in that liver because
Right.
they looked at it. If it was infested, the carcass would have been rejected.
Right, right. And that's if you've ever, which most people probably haven't, been to a meat processing facility, there is literally an inspector standing on each of the food lines. And they're
Yeah.
there to, casually pull things off, but also eyeball every single carcass that's going by. And things do get rejected.
Things do, a cow's got cancer and they see tumors on the liver or something like that, or somehow a cow comes through and she's pregnant, that's going to get rejected. They
And
find that
here's
there's
the thing though, even though it gets rejected, I think we're all aware that there are some pet foods that use the 4D, the dead
oh,
dying.
definitely.
Yeah.
Anything that's hitting a rendering plant, you have to assume had something that did not cut it as human food because
Yes,
that's how they keep their costs down.
exactly. So if you are concerned about it, definitely source from places that you can actually see the whole liver, the whole organ, because your eyes alone, even smell, like you use your own senses, when something.
Really important. If it smells bad,
Mhm.
we were discussing some kibble that I was testing, not tasting. No, that was bad. That's Rodney's department. Um, there's a video of him eating pedigree, by the way. If you haven't seen it, go to his Facebook page, Google Rodney Eats Pedigree. It's worth the 2 minutes. It's great. Um, but the kibble, the smell of kibble, and it's the sprayed on rendered fat, I think, but also the ingredients. Oh, you got help.
Yeah.
It smells awful.
Hmm. It does. It does. If you ever, so the Purina plant in Colorado, we drove through
Oh, yeah.
city a couple of times. I mean, the entire city stinks. It's terrible.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and when Evangers, the canned food plant that, killed at least one pug with pentobarbital laced product, and also was found guilty of stealing electricity, they abandoned one of their plants and left the city to clean it up. And so many town residents had complained about the stench from this,
I
and then
bet.
they just abandoned it. You didn't hear about them stealing electricity?
No.
It was proven in court, to my knowledge, but the story goes that they had one of their employees kind of hot wire around the electric meter, and they were stealing for a long period of time. And imagine how much electricity they used.
Yeah. I mean, we've got a kitchen and our gas and electric bill is through the roof.
Well, we've all seen your freezers,
Yeah.
your walk-ins, and I mean, I imagine once they get cold, it's not as bad to keep them cold,
Right.
but it's huge. It's
Yeah.
huge.
Yeah.
You
And
know?
it's tough, especially when you've got variable temperatures on the outside. I mean, it's cooler in San Diego than other parts of California, but it gets pretty hot in the summertime.
Mhm. Yeah, and you got to keep it cold.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, that's another trick someone asked me or shared with me. When you have a kibble brand that says like the first ingredient is a whole meat, let's say chicken or turkey or beef, the trick to finding out if that really is whole meat is to ask them how many freezers they have. Because if they're bringing in, isn't that golden? If they're bringing in, let's say hypothetically chicken, it would be chicken either in the chunk form or maybe whole birds or what have you, or deboned chicken, because that's popular. I think there are several brands that say deboned chicken. Uh, If they tell you they don't have any freezers, you know they're bringing it in as a powder, a meat
Right.
powder, and they're reconstituting it with water.
Mm.
Which is, and I know there is one large company that's very popular, a family-owned company, that does exactly that. And I'm sorry, that's deceptive. Because
Right.
when you and I say chicken, we might mean a whole chicken or a chicken thigh, leg quarter, whatever. Or,
We
chicken.
don't mean chicken powder.
We don't mean chicken powder reconstituted with water, which is not the same as what moisture they took out of there. I mean, they would have to truly reconstitute it with like chicken serum to make it
Yeah.
true chicken. And they charge you more for that.
Right.
Oh, Courtney found some worms. Yeah, I can understand that, Courtney. It would make me nervous too.
Yeah.
And I don't know that I would feed them. Just personal. But I do know, I don't think any worms in the kidney are going to infect your dog.
Yeah, which is a really good point to make. I mean, people all over the world that are eating organ meats, they're cooking them. They're probably not eating them raw. And so even if they are infested, cooking them is one
Would be
thing.
one option, sure.
Sure.
And even if you're a raw feeder and you feel better, steaming your beef kidney, go for it.
Yep.
It's still 1,000 times better than anything that's going to come through a kibble bag.
Yeah. But all of these organs that we mentioned, if you're not a raw feeder, you can certainly top your kibble with any of these. And that's something that I really encourage people to do. Like, start off that way. If you haven't made the jump from kibble to raw, because it's a lot, it can be overwhelming. It's a lifestyle change. Start by opening what's in your refrigerator, feeding eggs.
Or whatever you're making that night.
Exactly.
Maybe you're doing a little stir fry. So a couple of chunks of the meat, maybe a bit of the broccoli or whatever. That's a topper. So before you hit it with all the spices, obviously.
Right. Yeah. And I know a big trend that's happening here is people that are making their own burgers at home. They're also getting that liver meat and hiding it inside of their burger patties just to sort of get the nutrients, but not have to deal with the texture.
Yeah. Yeah. The texture and smell of cooked liver for me is unappealing. Amy has an interesting question. The dehydrated glandulars and organs, there are a couple of very good companies that are producing quality grass-fed dehydrated powdered organs. What's your take?
I think that anything in its raw form is going to be superior. When you talk about things that are dried, my first question is, what temperature is it dried at? Because we're losing a lot of our nutrients through that cooking process.
Yeah, you're not going to lose the minerals as much with the exception of iodine.
Right.
But any vitamins will be lost.
Exactly. So I would want to know that. And something that Dr. Kosher and I were just talking about before you got on was mineral testing. See if that company gets their powders tested and ask them for that analysis, because that will tell you if those minerals and vitamins are truly present.
And tell you if the label estimate is correct. And you've taken the step to testing, right?
We have. Yeah, we were talking about the different testings. We wanted to send out the grass-fed beef liver versus grain-fed beef liver before I had my last conversation with you, just for overall testing to see the different nutrient profile. And then you mentioned the concern about heavy metals, and I'm like, add that onto it too. Yeah, but we're waiting to hear back on that. But for the same reason, because there is a concern about nutrient loss, how can we prove to you that we've sent this product and it still has the same benefits?
Yeah. And, as long as we give people accurate numbers, I know a lot of raw feeders aren't into crunching numbers, but on some of these things, you really should at least once and know what you're feeding, know the quality, and have an idea of, if I'm feeding this ingredient 5 times a week, am I going to be over on anything or under? Am I still under?
Right.
The number of dogs walking around vitamin D deficient is huge.
Right. Yeah, no, and the deficiency and the toxicity are both equal concerns in our community.
Yeah.
But that's something that, there is vitamin D in organ meat and in
Mhm.
seafood, and that's one of the things
Yeah.
that's often missing. But Amy, that's a great question. I mean, we carry our own powders that are dried and ground up. And,
Mhm.
I think that they're great to complement a raw feeder's diet, especially if you can't access them. But that's the question that you want to ask. And
Yeah.
hopefully we'll be able to
Get
get
more
our test
details.
results soon.
And along the vitamin D line, I saw a post and I just didn't have it in me to comment on it, but it was about getting your dog out in the sun for vitamin D. And it's like, okay, that's I 200% support get your dog out in the sun and yourself too.
Right.
There's a significant percentage of humans that cannot process vitamin or convert sunlight and
Into
use that into vitamin D. And dogs are terribly inefficient at that process,
Mhm.
and they're freaking hairy. Do
Right.
you think through all that hair, any significant sunlight hits the skin? So a dog needs a significant proportion of vitamin D
Hmm.
from their diet.
Yep.
And on the human side, you can have DNA testing done on yourself, just a cheek swab, to find out what genes do I carry with regard to vitamin D metabolism in my skin.
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
I always think of Becker's father, who does not efficiently convert vitamin D. And one time she came upon him, and she has said this publicly, so I'm not hesitant about sharing this, that he's out laying on, I think, the wall of the back deck. I guess it seemed like a stone wall, she said, practically naked, getting his maximum vitamin D. It's like, okay, there's a man of nature. But, he's like, I'm using every ounce, every visible whatever of my skin is gonna be covered in sunlight, so at least I'll get as much natural D as I can.
No, and it makes so much sense. I did my annual physical last year and was told that I was vitamin D deficient.
Mhm.
And I'm darker skinned, there's a lot of melanin in here. So when I'm
Yeah.
out in the sun, I will change shades in minutes. Like it's so,
Wow.
so fast.
Yeah.
And in my brain, I thought because of that, I was adequately absorbing vitamin D or to enough sunlight to
Sunlight
convert it.
to convert
But
it.
in fact, that was not true. It was the reverse. Because I was changing so quickly, I was like trying to get in and out of the sun as fast as I could, and
Mhm.
I wasn't getting enough. So I, for a while, took a vitamin D supplement, and then I started to incorporate more seafood into
Mhm.
my diet. And the next time I went back, good. So
You would, yeah.
same goes for us as our dogs. They have to get it most efficiently through the food.
Yeah, and it's easy enough to just Google foods rich in whatever nutrient you're interested in, and it pops right up.
Yep. And for a lot of these things, the vitamins and minerals, you're going to find most of them in meat, fish, and organs.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah, without a doubt.
On the topic of vitamin D toxicity, I was teaching a workshop last week about that. And sorry, not vitamin D, vitamin A. Somebody
Oh,
asked, can I
great.
feed too much liver? And, will my dog suffer from a vitamin A toxicity? I personally have never seen it with fresh food.
Mhm.
I see the toxicity as a result of over supplementation of a synthetic vitamin A or vitamin D. That's what we saw with the Hills Science Diet case
Right.
not too long ago.
Yeah, their premixes were off and
Yep, and it's usually you won't see it right away. Like it's an length of time that they've been overfed or over supplemented.
yeah. It's important to remember that vitamins A, D, E, and K are all stored in fat.
Right.
So, feed a high level of vitamin of any of those vitamins over time, and you could be in trouble.
Yeah. Have you ever seen it in fresh food?
No, no, I
Same.
have not. More commonly, and I'm doing a fair number of VDI tests, more commonly, I see too low, especially vitamin D. I had a dog with a vitamin D. Normal on the lab, your goal is to get to 100. Anything over 80, I think they consider normal, but 100 is optimal. I saw a dog with a 25. That's really scary. And I don't recall, that might have even been a kibble dog. And again, kibble synthetics, which may not be handled by the body as efficiently. And who knows if the premix matches the ingredients that they're formulating with, because
Yeah.
it's just a general premix for many of these things. They'll all use the same thing.
How was the skin and coat on that dog?
Probably not great. Because I mean, normally I get people in. It's really, I enjoy those cases. I get an hour with them, um, and typically they've tried a lot of things. Conventional medicine has run out of options, or you know, become frustrating, and the owner finds somebody who finds somebody, or Google's me. So the dog may really look horrible. I had a Labrador named Benny, who I don't know if you're on here, my friend, but Benny, who I love, uh, came in at like 55 pounds. And he's now, 2 years later, chronic allergies, GI stuff, shredding himself on, running the gamut of stuff. He's now 77 and he's lean perfect. But imagine at 55, he was a skeleton
Yeah.
with hair loss, chronic hot spots, and he's transformed. Nobody knows what this dog has been through.
Sure, sure.
When you see him, you could never predict. But vitamin D, he's now in the normal zone, but she is also following a diet I designed that is, generously containing vitamin D, way beyond the minimums.
Yeah. I mean, for us, the vitamin D go-to is our oily seafood. That's
Yeah,
where I like to get the most of mine, and that's why it's such a staple in all
yeah,
of our diets.
yeah. Diane, I want to comment to this because I was talking with Dr. Kendra Pope about it. And she feels VDI is actually more accurate. And if your vet is questioning VDI's numbers, it's because you have to take Michigan's numbers and divide them by 2.5 to convert the units. And many vets don't realize that they're measured in different units. So he was probably saying VDI is saying it's super low when it may have been okay.
Twice that.
So
Yeah.
super, super important if you're going to compare between labs. Not that Michigan can't do a good job, but adjust your normals.
Right. Yeah. And, I think for me, the takeaway, especially with all of this, is a lot of people are going to feed fresh food anyway. And we
Mhm.
really encourage them to work with their veterinary team for things like this. Like, you
Yeah,
want to have all of the components in the bowl, but there might be some things that are missing or that your dog in particular needs a little bit more of, but you don't know that unless you do some sort of testing.
yeah. And sadly, conventional veterinary medicine often doesn't know much nutrition beyond recommending one of the big four,
Right.
or all of the big four. And they don't know about the testing options. I mean, even colleagues who work in the practice that I work part-time at, they're like, "What test did you do? What lab is that? I had never heard of that."
Hmm.
And they just don't know because these labs aren't in the mainstream.
Right.
And most of the mainstream labs, well, most of them are owned by Mars, let's face it. So you're not going to hear about this.
Yeah, we definitely in through our course and in our workshops,
Yeah.
we're like, these are the tests that you need to ask for. And I think so it's one thing to talk colleague to colleague, but if your client is asking for something in
Mhm.
particular, it's really at the end of the day, our dollar goes so much further than than
And
science itself actually
yeah,
will.
yeah. And I mean, like many of my colleagues, will just say, just go ask Lori, because they're not interested in learning. Their thing is, cardiology or orthopedics. And that's where I'm going to say, I don't know, go ask Stone. Um, and that's fine. We're all allowed to have our interests, but I think we're either obligated to be current for our clients,
Mhm.
or to be able to refer them to someone who is, because we can't be everything, even though we try.
Right. And the thing is, this even extends to the human medical world, which is for me the nutrition is the basis of health and wellness. And
Mhm.
at some level, we should have some sort of foundation of what good food looks like and putting that into our
Right.
bodies. And it's unfortunate because it is missing from human
Yeah, yeah,
medicine. No one's talking about, well, what does your diet look like? Are you deficient in vitamin D or iron or whatever it is?
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, they don't know, and, having labs like VDI and Innovative Pet Lab, which has some really interesting testing, they're another one of our sponsors that you'll meet. Um, they have some very high-tech GI stuff that is fascinating.
Yeah, I've got both Innovative Pet Labs and Animal Biomes tests here because a lot of
Uh-huh.
people get confused about what
Yeah,
the different tests are.
yeah, they're totally different tests, and there are a couple other companies that are doing microbiome testing now. So it's becoming so readily available. The
Yeah,
trick is having somebody help you with interpreting the results.
right, right. But the science is out there.
Science is coming. It's
Yes.
coming, and we're learning more, both on the human side and, on the vet side, and it always floors me when one of my conventional colleagues comes up with, "Do we have to give probiotics for the microbiome?" And it's like, "Oh, thank God." You know, you've it's music to my ears.
Now we're thinking.
Yeah, now we're really thinking about supporting the patient. Definitely. So let's see. Uh, yes. Oh, these two, Janet and Diane, they're always thanking each other. Thank you for putting out good energy in the world, guys. This is absolutely great. We have to keep learning.
Yes, and be proactive. I think that's
I've
huge.
never regretted the times I was proactive.
Hmm.
And I want to jump back to something you said, which is being proactive to me, wanting to start a raw diet, just taking that first step of a topper of fresh food. That's being proactive. That's starting the path, because it is a bit of a journey for someone who's only been exposed to feed 2 cups a day of these brown nuggets
Hmm.
to get to the bowls that we're used to seeing.
Yeah, and it's easier than you think. Like we said, open up your refrigerator, share what you're feeding or eating in your fresh food diet. And I tend to see a lot of people personally become better for it and thinking about, wow, what I feed my dog has significantly helped them health wise.
When they aren't calling the vet every week.
Yes.
I mean, the number of dogs I see with crappy skin and, chronic GI stuff, and I'm thinking, "Do my dogs ever get diarrhea?" Well, if they ate something they shouldn't, but generally speaking, or if I overfed organ meat, uh,
Hmm.
something they weren't, uh, thinking about, or not regularly in their diet at that quantity, but that's it. That's it. They might throw up like a piece of, the end of a chicken thigh bone. Sometimes that little cap of bone just doesn't get digested and it comes up, but that's it.
It
I don't I
happens.
don't deal with sick dogs.
Yeah. And those things happen for us too. We take a bite of something
Mhm.
and it's maybe like fatty or cartilage and we're like, you know what, I don't really want that. Our dogs do the same thing.
Yeah. Well, and, for birds, they empty their crop periodically. I mean, the body is sometimes needs to purge itself of things,
Yep. So
and
I'm
that's
a new chicken mom, and
yeah.
like I've had them for 3 weeks, and
What
one of
kind do you have?
they're two Rhode Island Reds and
Nice.
yeah, and one of them's crop is impacted. So I went down the rabbit hole last night because I'm like, I don't know anything about chickens. What do I do? And I
Mhm.
learned all about how they have to periodically purge or clear
Yeah.
out their crop, otherwise it gets impacted. I don't know what the answer is yet, but I mean, which is to say, all of our bodies naturally know how to deal with certain
Yeah.
things. And I think we often freak out when our dogs regurgitate or vomit, not realizing that that's their natural process of
Right.
handling a new food or digestion generally.
Or providing digestive rest.
Hmm.
And my patients who are kibble feeders, whose owners are kibble feeders, they'll get diarrhea or vomiting, and they want to they just like, okay, let me make chicken and rice, and they don't say, okay, number one, that's not what Lori would do, and number two, fast the dog for at least 12 hours. The
Right.
body is saying, I need to be empty.
Yes.
Respect that. Water, sure, little sips at a time, but the magic of chicken and rice is such a myth.
Well, and it's what we do for ourselves. We think of chicken soup, chicken noodle soup,
Sure,
and
sure.
it's our language of love for many of us, wanting to feed and nurture.
Yeah.
And you
But,
kind of
we've all been sick, and it's like, my stomach doesn't want anything, maybe some crackers and ginger ale at the very most.
right. And you know what? And that's the thing. A lot of us eat out of habit, not because we're
Mhm,
hungry or nutritionally really need more energy.
mhm.
It's just lunchtime, so time to eat.
Yeah, exactly. It just becomes part of our routine, or it's connected to something we're doing. Um,
But I
Courtney, just to skip back so we don't miss these
oh
questions. You guys know that they go away after a certain number of comments.
it says pork liver. I missed the first part of that.
Oh, it'll come back. With
Oh,
pork
okay.
liver being higher in iron, would you feed, for example, less pork liver than you would feed beef liver? Um,
I would rotate the
yeah,
same amount. If you use whatever your recipe is, in our raw feeding calculator on Feed Real, we break down each of the components so you know exactly how much to feed your
yeah.
dog when it comes to the organ proportion. So one week you're doing beef liver, the next week you're doing pork liver.
But if the pork liver is higher in iron, and you it would be a smaller volume that would use, because you're going to feed it to the correct amount of iron, which your
Exactly.
which your calculator will automatically do for you.
Right.
Yes. Yes. Thank you for that, Courtney.
Yeah. Variety is the spice of life. You've got to rotate.
Yeah. Well, and sometimes it's a good thing to have a decent sized freezer, because things are going to be tough to source and you might be forced to use pork for a while. Okay, you got some in there, you're comfortable using it. Then when variety is available, you take advantage of it, and you take advantage of sales.
Yeah, for
We're
sure.
all trying to get the best value for our dollar.
One thing I want to mention about organs, though, is there are some dogs that need to be on low purine
Right.
diets. And
Dalmatians.
yes, so if you have one of those dogs, organ meats are much harder to feed because they're so high in purine. And that would be an exception, in my opinion, of when you would rely on some sort of supplementation to meet those
Right.
requirements.
Or alternate food for some things that you can't. When we're speaking and saying and giving you any advice, we're talking about the generally healthy, normal dog.
Hmm.
Disease conditions are not in our consideration in this forum, because we
Right.
can't.
Yeah. And there are low purine vegetables, whole foods,
Sure.
seeds too, that will meet some of those requirements. But
Yeah, I think we don't often consider seeds and nuts.
hmm.
If I've got a choice between, and some people would say it wouldn't be natural for a dog to eat sunflower seeds, or Brazil nuts. But if I have a choice between that and a synthetic, I'm going to take the nut.
Right.
Um, easy enough. And nuts, a great source of fat for some nuts, like the Brazil nuts,
Hmm.
healthy fats. Uh, Courtney, you are a question person here, but these are great questions. Is it okay to feed several organs in one meal? I'm down with that. I mix my proteins, I mix organs. My dogs don't care.
Yeah, same. No, I think it's great to be able to do that from a meal prep perspective, not being so strict about, I've got to have this and I got to have that. I think it makes it so much easier to be able to mix and match, especially when you start running out of things.
Yeah,
The only time that I'd say you might want to take it easy is if your dog is sensitive to changes in
yeah.
food. And
And if I'm doing a grind, because I will grind a lot, and especially when I have puppies, I'll put mixed organs in there, mixed meats, um, grind the vegetables right in. It's a great way to get everything mixed and provide variety in the dish without having to pick out different packages or anything, or stress about, did I feed rabbit yesterday or chicken today? Grinding is easy. It's
oh,
work,
yeah.
easy.
And I just made a recommendation to someone in our raw feeding group. If you get a grinder that's at least 1.5 horsepower, you can easily run through poultry bones, and it makes raw feeding so much easier. It's just
Yeah.
convenient.
Yeah. And actually, I have a 3/4 horsepower Weston,
Wow.
3/4.
Oh, 3/4. Yeah.
And I can grind chicken and turkey effortlessly.
Oh, nice.
I think it has to do with the size of the grinding plate and the size of your auger.
Sure.
But 1 horsepower is generally what I recommend. If you're gonna be doing really big turkeys, you might want that 1.5 for sure.
I
But
had the Weston 32 for
Mhm.
years, and I think
Yeah,
I want to say that one was 1 horsepower, but it
yeah.
died eventually, and I might just be making more than your average.
You're making and you might be using bigger. I mean, don't delude yourself into think you're gonna grind beef bones because you're not.
It's not happening.
Um, so poultry bone is gonna be your bone source in a homemade grind.
Hmm.
But, I mean, turkeys go on sale. If all you can do are supermarket turkeys, they go on sale for like 39 cents a pound
Yep.
between Thanksgiving and New Year's. Go for it. And I can always lay my hands on whole chickens generally for 99 cents a pound. Now, yes, they are conventional, but it's use whatever. Um,
Yeah.
but the grinders of choice are Weston and Cabela's.
Yes, I like both of those. And LEM is another brand.
Not familiar with them. But
Uh,
if you're considering buying a grinder, I go to Amazon and I click on the links and I read the reviews. And somebody in there is gonna
well,
say,
then
"This is
now they've got
yeah,
that search function, so you can put find dog
with
in the
grinder."
yeah.
There's thousands of reviews on will it grind a bone? Because I got suckered on my first one. I didn't really read many, and it said it was like a cheap, 500 watt or something. And it was supposed to grind chicken wings, but it didn't. It's like, you can't grind a chicken wing, you're pretty much useless. So, as we close out, any other thoughts? Because I've kept you for over an hour.
Has it been? Oh my gosh.
Time flies, yeah. I know your day is just getting started.
It is. It is. Well, we've got a big day for 420. My last thoughts are, all of these components that we talked about are just really, really important, and they're easier to find, in fact, and to feed than chicken and rice than you think. Like, you don't have to even go out and prepare them.
Yes,
So if you're making that switch, or if your dog even has digestive upset, think about more natural ways to feed them the food so that they can get those nutritional benefits. If you're feeding raw and you're not including a liver and other secreting organ, really think about where you can get those items because they're important.
they really are. And yeah, and get started. Even if you put a little strip of liver or what have you on top of kibble, it's huge.
Yep.
And I don't know if Amy is still on this call, but I'm gonna and anybody else who is coming to the expo, get your Healthy Dog Expo tickets now, healthydogexpo.com, because we're going to be closing sales when we hit a certain number. I also uncovered a difficulty with the hotel. They were not adding some people to the room block and giving you a much more expensive hotel rate than you should have. So, if you've already booked a room at the hotel and you did not get in the room block and you're paying a high rate, call them, have them put you in the block and cut your rate by at least $100. So, Amy, make sure with your rooms you're in the room block because I want to save you some money. And with that note, I think I will be back with you guys next week. Look on the Facebook page for the schedule. Don't forget to go over to Real Dog Box and request anything unique you want brought because they can only ship so much. Fortunately, your stuff is light.
Yes.
That is an advantage, but still, don't
Yeah.
want you to have what you want. And watch for the bison scapula in the raffle basket. It's huge. Look at it. All right. Thank you, guys.
Thanks for having me. Bye.